Blake Toppmeyer with John Adams in the Knoxville News Sentinel. It's a newsy Monday for Tennessee football with the firing of Tennessee defensive line coach Jimmy Brumbaugh and more conversation about the quarterback situation. More on the quarterbacks in a bit, but John, to touch on Jimmy Brumbaugh's dismissal first, he was fired after just 4 games as Tennessee's defensive line coach, hired in February to replace Tracy Rocker. Jeremy Pruitt in today's press conference cited philosophical differences between him and Brumbaugh, and Pruitt said that he was going to coach the defensive line for the rest of the season. Brumbaugh's ouster leaves Tennessee with just 3 assistants on the defensive side of the ball. John, what did you make of this decision, and then what Jeremy Pruitt said about philosophical differences and his decision to coach the defensive line himself?
Blake, Tennessee is long renowned for strange things, and this was one of them. I don't recall there ever firing someone this early in a season. So that was odd in itself. As for the philosophical differences, that's the kind of thing that should be worked out in the interview process. He knows Brumbaugh, so you would think they would be on the same page, or he wouldn't even have hired him. So maybe he was just trying to come up with an excuse, but it certainly showed no regard for the athletic department's budget.
Yeah, you mentioned that budget, John. Jimmy Brumbaugh was signed to a 2-year deal worth $1.3 million. He's now owed more than $830,000 in severance payments due in monthly installments. He'll have a duty to mitigate the damages, but we've sort of seen how that goes. Butch Jones had a duty to mitigate the damages as well, and he took that duty so seriously he's been a glorified intern on Nick Saban's staff for the past several seasons and did very little to mitigate those damages. So, in this time of difficulty in terms of generating revenue for the athletic department, an issue that's really facing athletic departments across the country because of the pandemic and short on ticket sales and the whole bit. What do you think about the optics of firing a guy that is now owed more than $830,000 in severance? Should Jeremy Pruitt have taken that into account, or do you see that as not really being his problem?
Well, I just know in general, coaches operate through a very narrow lens, and they're thinking about football stuff. They don't think about the budget. It almost seems the timing of this as though this was a knee-jerk reaction to what happened against Kentucky. Perhaps it had been building. Pruitt had expressed displeasure with the defensive line's play, and maybe this was just the final straw, and so he fired him abruptly. I wonder if he even cleared it with the athletic director, Philip Fulmer.
You mentioned the frustration with the defensive line play. I think we've both felt that unit has regressed this year. I think we both gave Tracy Rocker high marks for what he did with that defensive line last season. Same group of guys this year, but there's undoubtedly been regression. Through 4 games, just 2.5 tackles for loss among the defensive linemen. That's a pretty jarring number. I mean, it's hard to go 4 games and only have 2.5 tackles for loss, but yet it's not the only position group that's been struggling on this team. And you've got veterans on this coaching staff, and Will Friend in year 3 now coaching the offensive line, a unit that's underperformed this season. Chris Winkie now in his 2nd season coaching quarterbacks, 3rd season on staff. Do you think there should be other guys, maybe other assistants on this staff, such as a Winkie or a Will Friend, who maybe should be put on notice by this dismissal of Jimmy Brumbaugh?
I would think any of the coaches would be put on notice. I mean, you don't see this very often. You just don't see many coaches fire a position coach 4 games into the season. So, yeah, and Pruitt addressed that somewhat in his press conference today, talking about basically it's a performance-based industry and everybody's coaching for his job all the time. That's just part of it. Easily said. Nonetheless, you don't see this very often. And makes me wonder if there were philosophical differences, couldn't that have been addressed? I mean, he's the head coach. Couldn't he say, "This is the way we want you to do it"? It makes me wonder if player relations weren't more of a factor into it, that maybe the players weren't responding as well to Brumbaugh's coaching technique, contrasted with Tracy Rocker, whom I think they all really liked. I thought that, and you thought the same thing. We talked about it on a podcast last year, that Tracy Rocker was a big loss, and it certainly looks that way today.
With the quarterback situation, John, we saw 3 quarterbacks play against Kentucky. Harrison Bailey made his much anticipated debut, the 4-star freshman. And, I asked Jeremy Pruitt about his quarterback situation at today's press conference. The way I put it is, a week ago, Jeremy said that Jarett Guarantano is Tennessee's quarterback. Is that still the case? And, Pruitt said that Guarantano is going to have to go out there and earn it in practice, but he said, quote, "Am I wanting to put Jarett Guarantano on the shelf? No, absolutely not." And I thought that was a pretty telling comment, and it says to me that Guarantano will be the starting quarterback against Alabama, barring something totally unforeseen.
Oh, I agree. I mean, it makes you wonder about the development or basic talent of the more experienced quarterbacks on the roster, Brian Maurer and JT Stroud, who came in and threw an interception following Guarantano's lead Saturday. But, I mean, nobody can unseat Guarantano is what it amounts to. And it seems as though Pruitt has defended Guarantano with more passion this year than he has in years past. And at the press conference, he was talking about he has protected the ball well. And I think he meant that except for the last 2 games. But going after 2 games, he'd done pretty much of what Pruitt asked of his quarterbacks. He does want somebody that can protect the football. And Guarantano, though not all his fault, certainly against Georgia, when the pass rush was overwhelming him, nonetheless, the interceptions go on his ledger.
Yeah, it's interesting. You pointed out a much stronger defensivist quarterback throughout this season than in years past. I don't know if that's just Pruitt maybe evaluating himself and not liking the way he handled the quarterback conversation last year, but certainly after that loss to Florida last year, and then the quarterback sneak that went awry against Alabama, and Pruitt on multiple occasions threw Guarantano under the bus, perhaps rightfully so. But this year at every turn, he's sort of defended him and, criticized other people rather than Guarantano at times. He criticized Jim Chaney's play calling after the loss to Kentucky. But now that the lid is off the Harrison Bailey era, what do you think the approach should be with Bailey throughout the back half of the season, John? I mean, how much do you think Jeremy Pruitt needs to incorporate him, and how should maybe he handle that between Guarantano, Bailey, and the other quarterbacks?
He threw a very nice touch pass right on the money against Kentucky, and I'm sure in the minds of Tennessee fans that will be remembered as much as anything that happened offensively. There's great hope for him. I think he needs to play Harrison Bailey. I realize this is an unusual situation. No spring practice, a very disjointed preseason build-up with the COVID-19 problems. So he's not as far along as he might have been under normal circumstances. But I always think talent prevails. And if this guy's really talented, and everybody that has seen him and all the recruiting services seem to think that, if that's true, then I would want to get this guy on the field. We've had JT Stroud and Brian Maurer. We've seen what they can do. Let's give this guy a chance. However, I don't think Pruitt's in a position where he can lose games trying to get a quarterback more reps or trying to develop a quarterback for the future. I mean, He's one game over 500 into his third year at Tennessee. That's not great.
And a big, a big challenge this week. Tennessee will welcome in #2 Alabama. For all the coverage previewing that game and for the Jimmy Brumbaugh coaching change and the ongoing quarterback situation, go to GoVolsExtra.com.